Welcome to Politics for Patriots. Here's your host, the eviscerator of progressive nonsense, the executioner of imbecility, and the grim reaper of BS, Eddie Zipper.
All right, welcome to episode 77 of the Politics for Patriots podcast. If you haven't yet, please subscribe on iTunes, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get podcasts. And remember that every time you subscribe to a conservative podcast, a liberal somewhere sheds a tear.
Please don't cry like that.
All these congressional investigations that are happening right now are yet another impeachment trap to try to ensnare President Trump. President Trump has not committed any high crimes or misdemeanors. So, House Democrats, who currently have unilateral power to impeach the president, are trying to trick the president into committing offenses that they can pass off as impeachable. They've been doing this since day one of his presidency, and even before that. Congressional Republicans have helped out quite a bit along the way because many of them are anti-Trumpers. We were able to purge a lot of the anti-Trumpers in Congress, but remember, a lot of them are anti-Trumpers who are in the closet about it. Closeted anti-Trumpers. They're out there in Congress. The establishment doesn't like the way you voted in 2016, and they are on a mission to undo what you voted for. Let me ask you this. From the day President Trump took the oath of office, how many times have you heard him compared to Richard Nixon, especially in terms of the Mueller investigation? The answer is tons. It's a favorite go-to talking point of the Democrats and the anti-Trumpers. The idea behind it is that if you say Nixon and Trump in the same sentence, Trump must be guilty of something, because what the hell else is he doing in that sentence with Richard Nixon? Unless he has committed some sort of Nixon-esque crime. If you're a news watcher, you've probably heard a Democrat bust out the Nixon talking point this week. They're trying to make the case for impeaching President Trump. And so, here's what they're out there saying this week. Trump is fighting congressional subpoenas. One of the articles of impeachment against Richard Nixon was for not producing documents in response to congressional subpoenas. Ergo, Trump is Richard Nixon. Period. Literally tune into CNN at any given moment of the day, and the anchor is like, "Is President Trump Richard Nixon?" And all 17 pundits on the CNN split screen are like, "Oh!" Yep. Alright, so this talking point has been ubiquitous all week long. One of the articles of impeachment against Nixon was for not producing documents subpoenaed by Congress. Trump is not producing documents subpoenaed by Congress. Ergo, Trump is Richard Nixon. But it got me thinking, this is actually a great idea. Let's do it. Let's compare President Trump to Richard Nixon. Not in a superficial way for a 5-second soundbite where we make a surface comparison. Let's do a real comparison. The kind that takes more than a 5-second TV pundit block. Let's talk about Richard Nixon's impeachment.
I'm here to help you with your history report.
Let's compare the Nixon articles of impeachment to the Mueller report. I cannot believe that nobody has thought of this. Let's compare the Nixon articles of impeachment to the Mueller report, and let's start with the stupidity of the talking point that Trump should be impeached because one of the articles of impeachment against Nixon was for not producing documents. That is a silly, stupid talking point. Why? The first and most important reason is that, hey, Richard Nixon wasn't impeached. Every quarter I ask my students, who were the two presidents impeached by the House of Representatives? And every quarter, you know what they guess? Sorry. Richard Nixon. Wrong. Never happened. He certainly would have been impeached, but he resigned and saved himself that particular disgrace. All right, so follow me here. If Nixon was not impeached, that means 0 articles of impeachment against Richard Nixon were ever passed by the House of Representatives. 0. So the articles of impeachment against Nixon could say anything. They could say, Nixon must be impeached because, ooh, look at those sinister jowls. Right? The article of impeachment that they're alluding to did not pass in the House. It wasn't defeated. It was never voted on. But we're supposed to not know the difference between an article of impeachment that passed the House and one that did not, because that waters down the talking point. It makes it less good. So, you don't ruin your soundbite by saying, oh, that article of impeachment that never passed the House. Now, 3 of the 5 articles of impeachment against Nixon did pass in the House Judiciary Committee. But let's take a look at how they passed. The House Judiciary Committee at the time was made up of 21 Democrats and 17 Republicans. 21 Democrats, 17 Republicans. The first article of impeachment against Nixon was for obstruction of justice. Oh, obstruction of justice. That sounds familiar. Oh, what is obstruction of justice? I've only heard it on the news 90,000 times. Trump allegedly obstructed justice as well. So let's look at the obstruction that Nixon was being impeached for, was not impeached, but was being impeached for. And then let's look at the obstruction that Volume 2 of the Mueller report alludes to. Let's see if we're looking at really similar situations here. Spoiler alert, we're not. Hey, it was not my idea to compare Trump to Nixon. It was the Democrats' idea. But I say if they want to do it, let's do it right. Believe me, if Mueller had dug up this kind of obstruction of justice case against Trump, he would already be impeached and removed from office. This is what legit obstruction of justice by the President of the United States sounds like. All right, obstruction of justice, article of impeachment against Richard Nixon goes like this. Making false statements or misleading statements to lawfully authorized investigative officers and employees of the United States. Withholding relevant and material evidence or information from lawfully authorized investigative officers and employees of the United States. Number 3, approving, condoning, acquiescing in, and counseling witnesses with respect to the giving of false or misleading statements to lawfully authorized investigative officers and employees of the United States, and false or misleading testimony in duly instituted judicial and congressional proceedings. Number 4, interfering or endeavoring to interfere with the conduct of investigations by the Department of Justice of the United States, the FBI, the Office of Watergate Special Prosecution Force, and congressional committees. Number 5, they get crazy as you go on. Number 5, approving, condoning, and acquiescing in the surreptitious payment of substantial sums of money for the purpose of obtaining the silence or influencing the testimony of witnesses, potential witnesses, or individuals who participated in such unlawful entry and other illegal activities. Number 6, endeavoring to misuse the CIA, an agency of the United States. Number 7, disseminating information received from officers of the Department of Justice of the United States to subjects of investigations conducted by lawfully authorized investigative officers and employees of the United States for the purpose of aiding and assisting such subjects in their attempts to avoid criminal liability. Number 8, we're almost done. I know this is long and dense, but bear with me on this. Number 8, making or causing to be made false or misleading public statements for the purpose of deceiving the people of the United States into believing that a thorough and complete investigation had been conducted with respect to allegations of misconduct on the part of personnel of the executive branch of the United States and personnel of the Committee for the Re-election of the President, and that there was no involvement of such personnel in such misconduct. Number 9, endeavoring to cause prospective defendants and individuals duly tried and convicted to expect favored treatment and consideration in return for their silence or false testimony, or rewarding individuals for their silence or false testimony. Okay, the difference between all of that and what's in Volume 2 of the Mueller report is astounding. You have Nixon misusing the CIA and paying people to lie. I mean, that is clear-cut obstruction of justice without a doubt. Distributing information so that everybody can get their lies straight. Okay, so consider all those things that Richard Nixon did, and then consider the air quotes evidence, close air quotes, that Trump obstructed justice. Volume 2 of the Mueller report contains things like Trump asked intelligence leaders if they could publicly refute Steele dossier allegations. You mean the salacious and unverified Oppo research paid for by Clinton and the DNC that we all know now was total BS? Oh my gosh, he asked intelligence officials if they could refute that? We know these are lies. Trump asked, can you refute these lies publicly? Presumably they said no, because they sure didn't do it. Asking someone if they can refute something that we all now know was untrue seems pretty reasonable. That's just one of many similar air quote obstructions, close air quotes, that you'll come across in Volume 2 of the Mueller report. All these tiny little things that Mueller thinks might be evidence of obstruction are changed by the fact that there's no evidence of Russian interference. Right? If we find out Trump was colluding with Russia, that changes the entire context. Why were you asking these guys to publicly clear you when you were guilty? Okay, that seems obstructy. Asking people if they can publicly clear you when they have no evidence that you did anything, the media is off the rails claiming you are treasonous and you didn't actually do it, and we know that now. That's a pretty different context. All right, most of the air quotes obstruction, close air quotes, that Trump supposedly engaged in involves being angry that there's a gigantic investigation into something that we just learned in Volume 1 did not ever happen. Impeachment trap from the start. Right? Volume 1. Big phony investigation into something that never happened. Trump-Russia conspiracy, collusion. It never happened. You can read Volume 1 of the Mueller report and find out that there's no evidence that that ever happened. That was made up. Volume 2. Aha! Maybe it's a crime to hate that big phony investigation. Here's some pretty weak circumstantial evidence that Trump hated that big phony investigation. Now, you could still obstruct if you were not guilty of the crime. Trump was not guilty of the crime. It was still possible if he had done the Richard Nixon things and paid people to tell lies and all of this. Yeah, that would be obstruction of justice. But going around telling people, hey, this investigation, these things did not happen. Is there anything you can do to tell the public that these lies are not true? Like, can you do something to abate this giant smear the media is engaged in? That seems reasonable when you are actually not guilty of the made-up crime. The circumstantial evidence in Volume 2 is very weak circumstantial evidence. And you can tell that by turning on MSNBC or CNN or any other mainstream media because they're only using adjectives to describe it. Read Justin Amash. Read his Twitter thread about, he's got this self-righteous Twitter thread. Oh, I read Volume 2. It's so disturbing. Literally, he does not name one piece of evidence that disturbs him. He's just using adjectives the entire time. It's disturbing. Oh, it seems obstructy. Okay, well, name one thing in there that seems really bad to you. Just name it. Oh, you have to put it all together for, oh, it's a math problem. I can't tell you the whole thing because it's a math problem. You have to add them all together to make them matter. All right, and that's what's all over the media, too. They're just describing it. Oh, it's damning. Oh, it looks real bad. Oh, it's Nixon-esque. But they're not citing the evidence specifically because the evidence blows. I mean, what if there was evidence in there, like with Nixon, that Trump paid somebody to tell a lie? That's all you would hear about. If you flipped on MSNBC or CNN, oh, Mueller found that Trump paid this substantial sum of money for a lie. That's all you'd hear about, is that specific. People wouldn't say, oh, it's damning, because all you have to do is hear it, and you know it's damning. But there's not one piece of evidence in Volume 2 that you can cite and have people figure out for themselves, oh my gosh, that's damning. It's not there. It's all very circumstantial. It's junk, especially given that Trump's not guilty of the crime. So instead of showing you and letting you go, oh my gosh, that's damning, they just say, oh my gosh, we're not going to talk about what it is, but ooh, it's damning. It's so bad. So most of the stuff that's in there is just circumstantial nonsense that we already knew about. I mean, what did you think it would say after 2 years of investigating? What did you think Mueller was going to say?
We ain't found shit.
To be honest, that is what Volume 2 of the Mueller report should say. It should say,
we ain't found shit.
But this whole thing is an impeachment trap. Impeachment is political, so you put in every piece of circumstantial evidence you possibly can in order to catch Trump in the impeachment trap. See, this impeachment trap, this particular impeachment trap, would have gotten Trump. It's really brilliant. Step 1, fake investigation. Step 2, aha, Trump tried to obstruct the fake investigation. But it didn't get him because he didn't use his Article 2 powers to shut down the investigation. He could have, but he didn't. Totally different situation than Nixon. Remember the Nixon list of things that he did to obstruct, paying people off, forcing people to lie, misusing the CIA. Trump didn't do anything resembling that. All right, so the Trump versus Nixon comparison here, it's not coming out the same. Nixon, real crimes, real obstruction. President Trump, fake crimes. Oh, we hope he's going to obstruct. Oh, no, he didn't obstruct, so we have to come up with these little things. Oh, he said to so-and-so, I wish there was no investigation. You know what the biggest refutation of Volume 2 of the Mueller report is? Trump is president of the United States. Trump is the executive branch right now. If he wanted to obstruct the investigation, he could have shut the whole thing down. Remember, Congress tried to set a more obvious impeachment trap during the Mueller investigation. Let's pass a law that it's illegal for the president to fire Mueller. Then when the president fires Mueller, you can impeach him because he has broken the law. It's the exact same thing they did to Andrew Johnson when he was impeached. I'm going to talk about that in a little while. But you remember this whole protect Mueller push, right? Jeff Flake refused to confirm any judges until it passed the bill to protect Mueller. The problem with that impeachment trap is that we know it's unconstitutional. The Tenure of Office Act, that was what they passed to trick Andrew Johnson into breaking the law. He broke the Tenure of Office Act law, and that was what they impeached him for. We know now that the Tenure of Office Act was unconstitutional. In 1929, the Supreme Court decided a case. In that ruling, they said the Tenure of Office Act is unconstitutional. Congress cannot usurp Article 2 powers and tell the president who in the executive branch he can fire. He can fire anybody in the executive branch he wants. All right? So it's the same impeachment trap that they set for Andrew Johnson. They tried to set it for Trump, but they failed. If Democrats had controlled Congress, like Republicans did in the 1860s, then Democrats would have passed that unconstitutional law. Obviously, that trap failed. Trump never fired Mueller anyway. He let him carry out the entire $40 million 2-year investigation. He didn't have to do that. The investigation yielded nothing except some pretty weak circumstantial evidence of air quotes obstruction, close air quotes. The fact that Mueller made it to the end and produced his report largely refutes the idea that Trump obstructed this investigation. All right, Nixon, remember this is a comparison, Trump versus Nixon. Nixon shut down the investigation against him. Saturday Night Massacre makes sense given that Nixon was guilty. Trump did not shut down the investigation. Makes sense given that the underlying crime never happened, as confirmed by Part 1 of the Mueller report. You know what Volume 1 of the Mueller report had to say about Trump-Russia collusion? Here's my executive summary of the principal conclusions of Volume 1 of the Mueller report on Trump-Russia collusion.
We ain't found
Now, Russia did interfere in the election with their social media campaign. If you've read the Mueller report, you know all about this social media campaign and the hacking of the DNC and the Podesta emails and all of that. But that's not Trump's fault. That's the Obama administration's fault. All the interference is happening through hacking and social media. And what is our intelligence community doing to counter it? They're following around George Papadopoulos. They're spying on Carter Page. The only universe in which that is Trump's fault is a universe where you really believe that Trump was dead serious when he said on TV at a rally, oh yeah, release Hillary's emails. Okay, these are not serious people, obviously. All right, so that stuff in the Nixon obstruction article of impeachment is what legit obstruction of justice sounds like. That's what Democrats were praying Mueller would discover. If Trump had done all that, he would already have been impeached and removed from office by now because the Mueller investigation would have wrapped up a year ago and the report would have been damning. Anyway, the obstruction article passed the committee, the House Judiciary Committee, by a vote of 27-11. Every Democrat on the committee voted yes. 6 of the 17 Republicans voted yes. So over 1/3 of the Republicans. That's very bipartisan. The second article of impeachment against Nixon was the abuse of power article. And I'm going to read it. Listen to what Richard Nixon did. He has, acting personally and through his subordinates and agents, endeavored to obtain from the IRS, in violation of the constitutional rights of citizens, confidential information contained in income tax returns for purposes not authorized by law, and to cause, in violation of the constitutional rights of citizens, income tax audits or other income tax investigations to be initiated or conducted in a discriminatory manner. Geez, that doesn't sound like anything that President Trump has done, but it does sound an awful lot like what Congress is trying to do to Trump right now. All right, number 2, abuse of power. He misused the FBI, the Secret Service, and other executive personnel in violation or disregard of the constitutional rights of citizens by directing or authorizing such agencies or personnel to conduct or continue electronic surveillance or other investigations for purposes unrelated to national security, the enforcement of laws, or any other lawful function of his office. He did direct, authorize, or permit the use of information obtained thereby for purposes unrelated to national security, the enforcement of laws, or any other lawful function of his office, and he did direct the concealment of certain records made by the Federal Bureau of Investigation of electronic surveillance. That doesn't sound like anything Trump did, but it sure sounds an awful lot like what the Obama administration did to President Trump. Do you sense the theme here? Democrats are the ones abusing power like Nixon. Number 3, He has, acting personally and through his subordinates and agents in violation or disregard of the constitutional rights of citizens, authorized and permitted to be maintained a secret investigative unit within the office of the president, financed in part with money derived from campaign contributions, which unlawfully utilized the resources of the CIA, engaged in covert and unlawful activities, and attempted to prejudice the constitutional right of an accused to a fair trial. All right, bear with me. There's a couple more. Number 4, he has failed to take care that the laws were faithfully executed by failing to act when he knew or had reason to know that his close subordinates endeavored to impede and frustrate lawful inquiries by duly constituted executive, judicial, and legislative entities concerning the unlawful entry into the headquarters of the Democratic National Committee and the cover-up thereof. And number 5, in disregard of the rule of law, he knowingly misused the executive power by interfering with the agencies of the executive branch, including the FBI, the Criminal Division, and the Office of Watergate Special Prosecution Force of the Department of Justice and the CIA, in violation of his duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. All right, now let's compare that to Volume 3 of the Mueller report, where Mueller outlines all of the horrible abuses of power of President Trump. Oh wait, there is no Volume 3 of the Mueller report because Trump did not do any of this stuff. And we know he didn't do it because Mueller would have found it. His investigation had unlimited resources to find things like this, and Trump didn't do any of this. Congress is doing it. The Obama administration did it. Trump is not doing any of this. All right, so those are pretty horrendous abuses of power that they found. Compare that with the Mueller report, and you see that what you're dealing with Trump is nowhere in the ballpark of what Richard Nixon has done. All right? There's not even an abuse of power section of the Mueller report. They had to go all in on circumstantial obstruction of a witch hunt investigation because they had no evidence of legit crimes like they had against Richard Nixon. So this article of impeachment passed 28-10. So by one vote, it was even more popular than the first article of impeachment, the obstruction one. Every single Democrat voted yes on this. 7 Republicans voted yes. Very bipartisan. Now, we come to the third article of impeachment, and this is the one the 24-hour news pundits are all excited about. This is the Trump-Nixon comparison. This is what it's all based on right now. The contempt of Congress article of impeachment. In his conduct of the office of President of the United States, Richard M. Nixon, contrary to his oath faithfully to execute the office of President of the United States and to the best of his ability preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, and in violation of his constitutional duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed, has failed without lawful cause or excuse to produce papers and things as directed by duly authorized subpoenas issued by the Committee on the Judiciary of the House of Representatives, and it lists the dates, and he willfully disobeyed such subpoenas. These subpoenas were based on the House of Representatives' function to exercise the sole power of impeachment vested by the Constitution in the House of Representatives. Legislative imperative for those subpoenas. And that's one thing to notice here is the very specific citation of what the legislative purpose of the subpoena is. The legislative purpose is for the House determination on impeachment. That's a very specific legislative purpose. Investigating the president blindly until maybe you can find something he did that was bad is not a legislative purpose, and it is in fact a total violation of the president's right to due process. But congressional investigations are political, so there is no due process. It's a big garbage joke. It's just partisan. Oh, we want these results. Let's investigate till we get them. And it's an implied power of Congress to provide the oversight, which means that there's no constitutional remedy if they're abusing that power, because the framers never put that power specifically into the Constitution to begin with. Okay, the next thing to notice, consider this in conjunction with what Richard Nixon actually did. We know that Trump did not do any of the crimes that he was accused of because the special counsel released a report that didn't find any of that. And the interesting part, this article of impeachment, after everything Nixon had done, and I read you the list, so it was bad. This passed the committee by a vote of 21-17. 2 of the 21 Democrats voted against it. Only 2 of the Republicans voted for it. It is impossible to know if this article of impeachment would have actually passed the full House, but there's a good chance that it would not have. And that is with it standing on the shoulders of the first 2 articles, and that is with it being investigations with a specific legislative purpose. Right? The investigations that Congress are doing right now, they're not for any specific person, or they're not for any specific purpose. They are just because
the investigations are sexy. The investigations are sexy. The investigations are sexy.
Does sexiness qualify as a legitimate legislative purpose? I'm not sure. I'll have to look that one up. All right, so the whole point, citing this third article of impeachment as precedent that, Trump should be impeached because of this precedent where Nixon was impeached for this. Okay, citing this article of impeachment as precedent is another, albeit much more desperate, impeachment trap. And one of the most outrageous abuses of power in American history was Congress setting an impeachment trap. Andrew Johnson was impeached. I told you I would come back to this. Andrew Johnson was impeached for breaking the Tenure of Office Act. That was an unconstitutional law passed by Congress that made it illegal for Andrew Johnson to fire the people in his own cabinet. It was a usurpation of the Article 2 powers. They didn't care. They used Andrew Johnson breaking that law as grounds to impeach him. So he fell into their impeachment trap. It's not till years later the Supreme Court rules, hey, that law was unconstitutional. Congress can't legislate Article 2 powers over to themselves. All right, so Congress has set impeachment trap after impeachment trap for Trump, and he has skated through them for one reason, and one reason alone. It is super hard to impeach the president when he has not committed any crimes. The House has the sole power of impeachment, and it's majority Democrat by a pretty big margin right now. About the same margin as the 93rd Congress when Nixon would have been impeached but wasn't. Simple truth. If Trump had committed a crime, he would have been impeached by now. Instead, the House of Representatives is desperately trying to open new investigations. They want to look at everything Trump has ever done in his entire life in an attempt to create new impeachment traps because all the ones they set before have all failed. Plus, we all know how the Democrats feel about investigating the president.
The investigations are sexy. The investigations are sexy. The investigations are sexy.
And while the President of the United States can be impeached, there's only one way to hold Congress accountable, and that is to vote them out. You can't impeach the House for abusing their implied powers, which is precisely what they are doing. You just have to vote them out. Also, you cannot impeach the Obama or anybody in the Obama administration because they're all gone. But in the meantime, I say if we are going to compare Trump to Nixon on the news, like we're important and we know lots of stuff, let's do it right. I mean, if we're going to talk about the articles of impeachment against Nixon, let's talk about what's really in them and show everybody that they in no way resemble the Mueller report. You now know what's in the articles of impeachment against Richard Nixon if you didn't know before, and you can see that they look absolutely nothing like what Trump has been accused of by Democrats. I've gone on too long. Thank you for bearing with me through that. If you haven't subscribed to the show yet, please subscribe on iTunes, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get podcasts. That's it for today. I'm out of here.
We ain't found shit.
You just listened to Politics for Patriots with Eddie Zipper. Email the show at patriots@eddiezipper.com. And please subscribe.